Hi there, my name's Alan Murdoch and I am the owner and head coach at Elevate Speed and Rehab. At Elevate, we take care of athlete performance, particularly with a focus on that end stage transfer of training into game speed and game performance. And we also deal with athlete rehabilitation as well, both short and long term, with a specialty in and around the ankle and the knee. Regan contacted me via social media initially, and we had a phone call to discuss the situation, and he told me that he had ruptured his Achilles tendon for the second time, which is a really nasty injury, and he'd done this on a return to training. So he'd approached me, having seen my work with previous international level rugby players with the same injury, and asked for my input and particularly a new look and a new approach into his rehab that would allow him to return not only back to the pitch, but back to the pitch better than ever. So initially what that looked like was a collaboration between myself and the medical department at Regan's rugby team in Paris. And initially my involvement was online, programming for his on-field and speed mechanics drills, and the medical department in France were looking after his strength work. And that relationship was really great. We were able to bounce ideas off each other, and Regan was a really big part of that process. And the outcome was that Regan was able to tidy up some of his movement deficiencies, understand and become educated in and around the mechanics of movement and speed prior to coming to me to Bath for our camp, which was going to last 2 months. That new approach that Regan was looking for is basically what I call a speed-based approach. Now, a speed-based approach is putting speed and movement firmly at the foreground of the approach and the system of rehab. And this is something that's not that common, and often in previous rehabs, you'll see the opposite approach taken, where it's all about volume of running and accumulating load on load on load. Now, what we do here is actually focus on movement quality and make sure that the athlete's confident and efficient in their movement patterns before worrying about increasing their volumes back to what they need to tolerate when they do eventually go back to return to training. Within that speed-based approach, I also utilize something I call a fast to fit approach. And this is actually the reverse to many other rehab protocols out there. Now, the first thing that I'm interested in is, can I get the athlete being able to tolerate the demands of high intensity actions? Now, those high intensity actions are the things that are the real breadwinners on the field of performance. Acceleration, deceleration, change of direction, and maximal level sprinting. So with those in mind, we reverse engineer the qualities necessary to become really good at those actions and develop slowly but surely the qualities that underpin them. From there, and once we've got efficient movement patterns, we look to increase the intensity first of what the athlete's doing, traveling faster and faster and faster each session until they're able to PB their acceleration and their max velocity running. Once we've achieved those landmarks, then what we'll do is reintroduce volume into the cycle and allow them to build up a weekly and daily tolerance to what they're going to need to do when they get back onto the field of play. Our 6-week camp was split into 2 phases. Now, the first phase was all about education, regaining strength, and developing a capacity to be able to tolerate the high intensity actions that I've just spoken about. When Regan came to me, there were still considerable force deficits and even size deficits in his ankle and his calf area that we needed to address in the first 3 weeks. So we spent 4 days a week solely going after his ability to produce force and underpin movement qualities with lots of drills based in the gym itself. Now, once we'd finished that 3-week phase and Regan was able to tolerate putting himself in positions that were going to benefit him on the field efficiently, what we did was we moved in towards an intensification phase. So phase 2 was all about getting back on his feet, beginning to learn how to coordinate running fast and changing direction, and most importantly, building up some confidence in that phase and in that action. So once we'd got to that point, we started to build and layer on the intensity until Regan was PBing his speeds and feeling really, really confident with his boots on the grass. And anybody who's ever had an Achilles injury will recognize that that is such a huge hurdle of the rehab process, is having the confidence to really run fast, hit the ground hard, and have confidence changing direction and challenging your opponents. So next up is our final phase of the rehab. Now, the final phase of the rehab is the most important one, and that's all about allowing Regan or the athlete to feel confident and tolerate the demands of a training week and even gameplay. Now, To do that, we have to understand the demands of the game itself and the training demands of the environment that he's going into. So I'm fortunate in that I've got access to Premier League data and understand how much training and running, amount of accelerations, decelerations and contacts that he'll have to do in his job on a day-to-day basis, but also understanding the worst case demands of the game itself in terms of competitive match play. Now, we've got 4 weeks to build up to those worst case demands, and we'll look at manipulating and pulling and tweaking different variables. But the main thing is that Regan gradually and progressively tolerates those loads and those stresses at the same time as being able to develop his skills and decision making that will allow him to return to training not only just confident, but better as an athlete as well. There's several layers to this question, and the first one is, how does the athlete move? What gaps are there in the athlete's movement profile that we need to bolster and fix before we're worrying about going out onto the pitch and moving fast? So that's the first thing. The second thing is the force profile that the athlete has. Do they have gaps in their ability to produce force in certain areas of their body and in certain movement patterns? Again, we'll use the force plates to understand this to a greater degree, and we'll make sure that our training is tailored to whatever gaps there are within the profile. The next layer to our process is understanding how the athlete utilizes that force. So through a variety of power-based tests, again using the force plates and our biomechanical monitoring system, we're able to understand how quickly an athlete can generate force in different directions, but not only how much they create, but how they generate it in terms of how they move. Now, this is a really important process within rehab. It's quite common to see athletes build up a similarity in terms of the amount of force that they can produce, but big gaps in terms of how they produce it from a movement perspective. And understanding this allows us to hone in and coach and cue the athlete to better movement solutions that are not only more effective, but long-term are more efficient and protect against harm in the future. And the final one is what happens out on the field, our locomotor profile. So how does an athlete move when they're running at max speed? Are there gaps in their acceleration versus their max speed profile? These are all questions that we'll answer systematically to make sure that training is dictated and directed towards the athlete themselves. When we look at speed, we're looking at 4 major components. We're looking at their contact time on the ground, their air time in terms of how far off the ground they travel when they are running, their step length and their step frequency. Those 4 key pieces of information will allow us to coach and cue and train the athlete to allow them to become more efficient and ultimately faster and healthier when they return to training. The final piece of the puzzle is load monitoring. Now, we are fortunate here to have Stat Sports supporting us, and we will monitor the load of the athlete from a sessional, a daily and a weekly perspective, and long-term over weeks and months. Understanding the progressive nature of the athlete's loading allows us to safely progress on their training in line with the demands of the professional and the international game. That's really important because I think it's imperative an athlete returns back to the pitch confident that they can tolerate the demands of training and, most importantly, the demands of gameplay. The rehab's been a complete success. We've seen Regan PB his movement scores, his strength scores, his speed scores, but most importantly, I've seen a huge change in Regan psychologically. When he first came into the gym, he was tentative about his movement. He was constantly worried about his ankle and his Achilles. But now, it's almost as if he's an uninjured athlete. He's ready to get out onto the pitch. He laces up his boots with excitement, and when he does go out onto the pitch, he does everything with 110% committed to learning and bettering himself. And I think that's a sign of a good rehab, an athlete who no longer is concerned about a body part, but is more concerned about how quickly they can learn and become a better athlete themselves. There's a couple of things that really stand out to me that maybe sit in the background of rehab and how important they are. And the first one is recovery. Dialing in nutrition, dialing in recovery strategies, whether that's getting in the pool, using the sauna, jumping on the hyperbaric chamber, whatever that is, whatever the recovery strategies are that the athlete feels works for them, you've got to make sure that you're on top of that 110%. Now, the reason that is because as training progresses in rehab, the demand of the body gets higher and higher and higher, and the stress response and the fatigue off the back of that becomes higher and higher and higher. So as we get to the back end of the rehab, the recovery strategies that the athlete employs are just as important as the training strategies, and I can't emphasize that enough. The other thing I think that is not spoken about very regularly is actually the athlete educating themselves around what it is that they are trying to do in the next session or the subsequent sessions that's about to come. Now, what I mean by that is Regan is dead set on watching his footage back every time that we do a training session. Now, not only does this install into him exactly how he wants to move and be able to visualize that and learn from that in the next session, but it also makes him far more coachable to me as a coach, because we can talk about things that I know that he truly understands because we've either sat together, reviewed the footage, or he's done some footage review by himself. I say it all the time, but the educated athlete is the most powerful athlete. And Regan has done an unbelievable job of that, both with me and externally by himself, to up-educate himself and become a very well-rounded athlete in terms of his knowledge of what he's trying to do from a movement perspective. One of the most underappreciated elements of a rehab is the last few weeks of that process. Now, very commonly, support staff will be able to get an athlete strong, robust, powerful, you name it. But often what's missed is that ability to take all of that training and transfer it into genuine game performance. And that's where end stage drill and sessional design and an understanding of the theory of motor learning comes into play massively. Being able to design drills that have got relevant defenders and space, timing constraints, even skill demands relative to that player in their position is critical in ensuring that they make that bridge from rehab and training to performance. And that's something that we focus on really heavily here at Elevate, and it's something that's contributed massively to Regan's success and his ability to drop straight back into training, feeling confident and able to execute skills at a really high level. Well, like any high-performing team, it's never just about one person. There's a team around the team. And without the support of our massage therapists, our skills coaches, and our physiotherapists to ensure things medically are ticking along the way they should be, Regan's success would never have been as high as what they have been. It's been an absolute joy to see him progress, to challenge himself, to challenge me, and actually see him flourish and ready to leave Elevate and go on to achieve greater and better things. So I can't wish him but the best of luck, and it's been an honour to be able to rehab him these last couple of months.